Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Can you hear me? Yes. My name is Carmen Tedeschi. I am the president of the Christian Fellowship Club here on the campus. There's about 40 clubs altogether on the campus. And we are sponsoring Dr. Augustine Sohn to give this talk. We are also collaborating with the Action Social Political Empowerment Club, who is emphasizing the relationship of the Constitution and the Founding Fathers with God as the creator. So they have a little poster here. And there are flyers here and also flyers for our club if you're interested. Okay, I want to introduce Dr. Sohn. I want to tell you a little bit about him first. He's an associate professor at the University of Illinois in Chicago, doctor of family medicine. He teaches residents there, medicine. He's also an elder in our church and a missionary, South Korean by birth and a citizen now of the United States. He's married to his wife, Teresa, who's also in our club, and they have 6 children. He's going to talk about the history, the government, the separation of North and South Korea, the leaders since the separation, the current leader, and several defectors' stories from North Korea. And he's going to say a little bit about the underground church as well. So please welcome Dr. Augustine Sohn to talk about North Korea. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tedeschi, for your kind introduction. We go to the same church. I have visited this campus in the past, several years ago, but the library seems to be much better for you. I have to say that I'm not an expert of North Korea. Also, my major is not history or economics. My major is medicine. But I was born in Korea and lived there about 30 years. I came here in 1987, so I lived in Korea about 30 years and here about 30 years. So I can say something about Korea, Korean culture, history, and recently, as you are aware, a lot of news about North Korea. So when Ms. Tedeschi asked me to talk a bit about North Korea, I said yes, without knowing this huge audience before me. And also I'm not a good speaker, but I'm here today. The early 20th century of Korean history is the interesting one because Korea was annexed by Japan 1910. Turn of the century, there are many great powers to influence Korea. So finally, between Russia and China and Japan and the United States, finally Japan won the competition and annexed Korea 1910. So it lasted about 36 years until the end of World War II, 1945. At the end of the war, about a year before, the leaders of this Britain and United States, Russia met together in a small city, Yalta, right now is in Russian town. And they decided the fate of Korea after the World War II. So they decided that North will be occupied temporarily by Russians and South by the United States to disarm the Japanese army. So they went in, and so it took about 3 years for both and South to, initially they tried to have one government, but it didn't work out because the different ideology between North and South. So 1948, South established their own, more of a democratic, American-style, capitalistic, system-based government. That's South, 1948. The North developed Soviet-backed, communist-based government. And so that was the beginning. And the North, with the help of the Soviets, 1950, they invaded south, and it took only 3 years to capture Seoul. And within a few weeks, they almost completely occupied South Korea. But South Korea, at the time, the president was Mr. Lee. He talked to Truman, obviously, and the UN was involved. So UN force was involved, and then they pushed north back to the river. Here, the second picture, river to the Yalu River, and so this is just geometry. This is China. This is Korea. Korea is a peninsula. The sea, east, west, and south. Japan is here. So this is 38 parallel line, and north came down very quickly. It took maybe a few weeks to occupy most of Korea, except this Busan. And then MacArthur landed with UN force here in Incheon, and they pushed back up to this river. And when they reached over here, the Chinese sent 1 million soldiers to the peninsula. So it took about 3 years until they have armistice. Armistice is not the peace treaty. So technically speaking, North and South, they are still at war. There's no peace treaty. They are still technically at war. So any part can attack the other. So that's the current situation. So North started, Kim Il-sung, the leader, started the war. And after 3 years, it has armistice. Kim Il-sung had a son named Kim Jong-il. So he ruled since 1977 until 2011, when he died of pancreas cancer. The second Kim had 3 sons. The first one was his name was Kim Jong-nam. He was recently killed in an airport in Malaysia. His second son is Kim Jong-chol. He was regarded as a little bit girly, so he was excluded to be a future leader. Kim Jong-un, the third son, is the current leader, and he was appointed as 4-star general and vice chairman of the nation's Central Military Commission in 2010, and when his father died, he became the leader of the country. He has 2 policies, Kim Jong-un, the current leader, 2 policies. One is economic development. He wants to allow some private business. Also, he continued to pursue nuclear program. And so this parallel policy made him in some way popular in North Korea. So according to South Central Bank, 2016 was very good year for the North because they have economic development. However, they still have a problem of food. And according to 2017 report, 2 out of 5 people are undernourished, and 70% of Koreans are still suffering because they rely on food aid, according to the UN report 2017. As I said, I don't have any direct eyewitness information about North Korea, but there are several defectors, not several, thousands, 31,000 defectors from North for the last several years. One of them is Miss Soon-ok Lee, whose picture I don't have. She was a college graduate, and after graduation, she worked for a government office where she delivered the goods for party members. But one day she was arrested, and she was accused to have committed some crime. So she was sent to prison and spent about 7 years. Even though she was a faithful Communist Party member, she was accused and tortured. She also witnessed what happened in prison in North Korea. So, but she was initially sentenced to death, but later life sentence, and then she was released after 7 years. She was very distraught because of her experience as a person, and also what she saw in the prison. So when she was released, she and her son escaped to China, later came to the South. And later she wrote a book based on her experience titled Eyes of Tailless Animals. This book was later translated in 2002 into English, and she was invited to the US Congress in 2002 and spoke about what's happening in the prisons of North Korea. And she was also invited by the UN High Commission for Human Rights. So according to her book, the prisoners were treated as enemies of the society, and they could be tortured and killed at any time. She, in her book, she mentioned about situations of Christians. She witnessed death of 8 Christians in a factory. Christians were killed by liquid iron of 1200 Fahrenheit, liquid iron, and with that, they were killed suddenly. And I'm quoting what she said. "Suddenly, the smell of burning flesh assailed my nostrils. The bodies began to shrivel from the intense heat as the liquid metal burned right through their flesh." She witnessed many other prisoners who died by starvation and forced labor. She said there were about 6,000 prisoners in 1987, but after 7 years, most of them were not in existence. So she witnessed this during her meeting with the US Congress and the UN High Commission during her visit 2002. The other person is Ji Sung-ho. Ji Sung-ho was a very young man in 1990s, growing up in North Korea during the time of famine. He was trying to steal some coals from the railroad cars and get some food by selling the coals. But he collapsed because he was so hungry and fell to the railroad track unconscious. He did not see the coming train, so he was injured. His limbs were maimed under the train. He had multiple operations. It took about 8 months for him to recover. And during the operations, they didn't use any anesthetics because they didn't have any supplies of anesthetics. And his father took care of him for this 8-month time period. And his father was very much stressed as well because of suffering his son. Later, Ji went to China to get some food and came back. But when the North Koreans arrested him, they said, "You're a disabled guy. Why did you leave the country and show the disability of our people? It is a shame for you to leave our country to show your disabled body to Chinese and other people." So they again very badly treated. At this time, he decided to leave the country with his family members. So with his family members, they escaped to North, but his father could not escape. He was captured, tortured to death. So he showed up in the State of Union address and Donald Trump's address. He said this crutch, he keeps this crutch to help him to remember the cruel injustice of North Korea. And he's working for human rights violation of the North in South Korea. The Kim family There's other example of Otto Warmbier, the American who was captured during his tourist trip to North Korea and came back as comatose, as a coma person, as in coma, and he died a few days later. You can see his face at the same address. I felt that that was the saddest face of a man. Can you imagine that your son visited some country, captured, and came back in coma and died in a few days? I have 6 children. 4 are boys. I don't imagine one of my sons to die like that. The Kim family has been a dictator family, and the third Kim is the 3rd generation. Can you imagine that one family rules for 70 years? I'm not so sure whether I can bear. However, let me give you a brief story, background about the 3rd Kim. He was said to grow up and went to school in Switzerland for 4 years. And it is also reported that he liked computer games and basketballs. His hero is Michael Jordan from the Chicago Bulls. And his friend is Dennis Rodman, who visits North Korea to his friend Kim Jong-un several times. During his early years, he was helped by his uncle. But recently, as you heard in the news, he had his uncle killed in 2014 with 140 other members. His uncle is promoting the idea, telling him try to cooperate with China to become better, North Korea to become better country, but he didn't like the idea. He also had his older brother Kim Jong-nam, is also in the news, killed in 2017 in Malaysian airport by nerve gas chemical in February 2017. Scholars, there's a report that his father, Kim Jong-un's father, before his death, said a few things to his son. You have to do, these things as a leader. One of them is never give up on the nuclear project. So that's why he builds up the nuclear capacity. There was 6 tests for the last several years. Out of 6, 4 tests were done under Kim Jong-un. The last test was a hydrogen bomb test. That's September 3rd, 2017. So North Koreans try to use this nuclear as a negotiation chip to negotiate better in some way. And also they want to be recognized as a nuclear power. Okay, we may be small, but we have nuclear weapons. So just don't treat us badly. That may be their strategy. On the other hand, South, I didn't have a chance to talk about South. South adapted the capitalistic system. I'm sure there are a lot of negative aspects of capitalism, including corruption, etc. But South is now 12th economy, largest economy in the world. And in my opinion, is a democratic, prosperous country. And I don't think the US can give up on the South without a fight if needed. So that's the tension in East Asia between North and South. I read a title of New York Times this morning before I came, and saying that North Korea is willing to discuss giving up nuclear weapons. That's, to me, is a good news. Okay, so finally, there may be some discussion going on hopefully between South and North, and also hopefully with the United States. I want to talk briefly about underground church, as mentioned. Um, the capital of the north is Pyongyang. Pyongyang is situated on the northwest part of the peninsula. Pyongyang is the capital. Missionaries came through China, and Pyongyang was the center of Korean Protestant Church before the war. 1945, there were about 15% Christian population in the north. So they called, north were more Christians. But during the war, most Christians withdrew with retreating U.S. Army. So after the war, and also church buildings were destroyed. The North claims that by U.S. airstrikes. I think that's correct. So about 70 churches in Pyongyang, all destroyed. So after the war, with no church building standing, and also many church leaders and Christians retreating to the south, North doesn't have churches that we know as of today in here or other countries. And also, communist ideology is the opposite of Christian faith. So in public, they were ridiculed and antagonized because of ideology of communism. So what happened in North Korean Christianity is that churchgoers gone, and they met in small groups in the family homes like this. So they said that about 10 people get together, and fortunately, the other group has Bible. This, I don't know, is a Bible or something written. They rarely have Bibles, but they pray together in secret. So the churches and Christianities in North Korea is like this, private house church. And according to the woman Sunok's report, many Christians are in concentration camp. So in concentration camp, some Koreans and some house church members, like small group, secret. The third, maybe there are some new Christians who met Christian workers in northern part of, across the river in China area. So there are many Christian workers and missionaries who are working in China, trying to help these people who escaped Korea. They provide food, whatever is needed, and sometimes they share the gospel. So there are new Christians growing up, being converted in China, and some people come down to North Korea to help their own people. Even though majority come to South Korea to live in South. As I said, I have never been to North. I am from South Korea, and my family lived in very south tip. So growing up, I never had any direct experience of the war, Korean War. But Korean War said to be most fierce war with a lot of casualty. There are 4 million people, south only, including civilians died. 47,500 US soldiers were killed. I don't know how many were killed in Vietnam or Afghanistan. Much more numbers were killed in Korea. 5,000 British soldiers died. Several other country soldiers, total 16 countries. So I grew up in South Korea, but I always felt that, I am a citizen of divided country. Country is divided, okay? So I didn't feel whole. I didn't feel well. My country is divided. It's very difficult. Anyway, I came here as I became a Christian when I was in college. I came here as a physician and also lay missionary to my church with my wife. So the division has been for the last 65 years. And there's some sentiment between South and North saying that we are one Koreans, and some of you may have watched Olympic Games. They formed one team, I think women's ice hockey team. So that part is going on. Has been the same people for 4,000 years, divided for 65 years. So in one aspect, we want to be one. It's like your family. On the other hand, in my opinion, North Korea is started with communism, but now it's sort of a dictatorship. So it's very hard for me to accept them as a fellow Koreans. I think they are most of all kind of terrorist group or dictators. So I'm not 100% sure that I feel the same way with North Koreans that I feel with other people. Average men and women in North Korea, per my reading, are victims, the citizens, and prison inmates. And defectors, there are 30,000 defectors now living in South. They tell the story. There's a show every week. They come to the broadcasting company and share their stories of life in the North. I visited South Korea last month for some other reason. And some people say that these defectors are true defenders of the lifestyle of the South. I don't know what's going to happen in the Korean Peninsula, but one thing, so it's good to hear that there may be a talk, discussion, but one thing I can maybe share with you is that many North Koreans crossed the border because they were hungry and for other reasons. But when they are captured in China, they are treated as criminals. They are not treated as refugees. So they are sent back to North Korea, and they are treated very badly when they are sent back to North Korea. And they are treated as traitors, obviously. So their fate is maybe 100 times worse than before they deserted the country. So one thing I can think about is we as American citizens and residents, we can, I don't know, use our political power to talk to the government. And I hope China accept North Korean refugees as refugees. I'm sure they have their own internal problem. If they accept all North Koreans may desert. So they have some sort of agreement, I think, between North Korea and China to send all these people back to North Korea. You know, as a citizen of the United States, I think we see the strength of United States in many different ways. One of my friends who is from China said to me that, well, within 10 or 20 years, China will be real superpower nation in terms of money, in terms of military force. I think that can be really true. But for me, United States stands for the right of individual human beings to treat them well. As a Christian, I would say God-given right to be fed, to not to be thirsty, not to be imprisoned, not to be mistreated. So that's, to me, I don't know how you feel about our country. To me, that's what we stand for. And I think in some way we have a responsibility to care for those people, okay? So maybe some negotiation is going on. But fundamentally, I hope that we have the same mindset. Obviously, they are not well treated. They don't have to be rich and prosperous like all of us, but they need some some freedom to move around, to travel, to worship God, as opposed to their dear leader. To me, that's idol worship. They are suffering. So my prayer is that they may be free to live and to prosper like everybody else. Give them a chance to live and to prosper as a human being. And on top of that, maybe worship God as they wish. Currently, only 1.3% populations are Christians. That may be the different aspect, but I strongly believe that as a citizen of free world, this country, we have to remember the North Koreans who are suffering under very serious, severe system of dictatorship and imprisonment. Okay, thanks. And if you have any questions, I will try to answer as much as I can.
And I have a microphone. If there's questions, I'll come to you
Yeah.
with the mic so we can all hear.
You have a question? Okay, my wife has a question.
I wonder if you could explain how the North Koreans defect from their country. It's very difficult, I understand. How is it that they are able to leave, and what route do they take?
Yeah, so this is the highest mountain is Baekdu. This is called the Yalu River, and this is a two-man river. But even though it's called the river, it's very not wide river, so people can sometimes in and out. The Mr. G crossed the river for food, so there are some soldiers guarding, but they also said that with a bribe, because the reason is for food, they allow people in and out. But obviously, could be very dangerous. But this is not a huge river, two-man river. It's like from here over there, maybe, depending on the season. So during the night, some people can escape and things like that.
Where do they go once they get to China?
They get to China, they just travel. There are many cities. So around this area, I have other book, a physician who settled clinics around this area. So this area, many volunteer workers from the church and other humanitarian organizations, they stay around here. They welcome and they take care of these defectors. Before 2009, 70% of women were the victims of sex trafficking. Do you believe that? 70%. They, have prostitution, or the China, because of one-man policy, not so many women for their wives. So these women crossed the river, became the wives of very old Chinese men, and there are stories about that too. And later they escaped. So victims of human trafficking, especially women, until 2009. After 2009, many volunteer workers work around this area. When they met those people, led them to South Korean embassy. So the rate of victims of sex trafficking decreased to 15%. So from 70% to 15%. There are women try to do something to get out of their poverty. The 30% of women say that their main reason to escape to China is because they are so hungry, they couldn't eat. Men have some different reason, political reason and things like that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, first of all, for that great talk. We all appreciate it. I know that for sure. You kind of glossed over this, but I was wondering, what influenced you to convert to Christianity? It seems like such a big part of who you are and your identity, and I was interested in seeing how that came about.
Yeah, I was a college student in med school. My friend was a Christian. He followed me for 1 year or longer, asking me to study the Bible. And I had a girlfriend. I was smoking and drinking, and I was enjoying my my life, and I was not interested in. And I had a girlfriend who was from the United States. When I was a second year in med school, she came to Korea and said, she's very nice looking, and but she said, why don't you get engaged and come to the United States? But she was sort of, forgive me, that she was a little bit different than I expected. I didn't really think that she can be my wife. So anyway, I don't want to say the detail. But she left to the state, and I had other girlfriends at the same time, and it was very difficult for me. And there was rumor that in my club that I got engaged to this woman from the United States. So my current girlfriend was very, very mad and disappointed. So I had two women let go at the same time. Not what happened. But anyway, so I was drinking. I was a little bit depressed. Came to my class, and one woman showed me a Christian tract saying, a surgeon from Michigan, how he became a Christian. And a few days later, my old friend who chased me for years came and asked me to study the Bible. And I said, yes, okay, now is the time for me to do something, to read about it. So I read the Bible with him, and I was totally non-Christian. I didn't know anything about the Bible. But with my friend's help, I became a Christian after about a year later. If you're interested I can tell you more, but this is different setting. So any other questions? That's okay with you? I mean, do you understand how I become a Christian? Yes.
I have a question. Could you talk a little bit about how the underground churches have come to existence in North Korea? Were they there prior to the war? Are there people that are bringing Christianity across the border from South Korea into North Korea?
Can you
Is that a
the
family?
first part, I didn't.
How are the underground churches that exist in North Korea? How were they established? Where did they come from?
Yeah. So they have, as I said, 15% were Christians in the north. So during the war, 1951, they had to retreat, the U.S. Army. Most Christians followed the army and went down to the south. So there was remaining Christians. At the same time, in public, Christianity was sort of despised. So, and also they were persecuted. Their ideology is that Kim Il-sung is almost God. You have to worship him, bow down. And so Christianity couldn't practice Christianity in public. So in one sense, they became underground churches. If they were found to be Christians, they were arrested and executed. So the number of Christians, actually, we don't know exactly how many, 1.3%. But recently, as I mentioned, some became Christians when they crossed the river. Christian workers worked there, helped them to feed, provide shelter. So they, at the same time, they share the gospel, and they became Christians. Some people went back to North Korea to share the gospel. So I don't think we have exact numbers, how many underground Christians are operating in the north. Okay.
Other questions? All right. How about one more round of applause? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I will stay here for a few more minutes if you have any questions.